Good morning, church. You see something on here? I don't know if you do, but so Pastor Blake is leaving this morning to go to Africa. So if we could, just all as a church, be praying as he's there these next 2 weeks, just that God would bless that trip and keep him safe. And he has a lot of teachings. I think I was like 15-something teachings, I think I was told. It's an exciting time. It's a busy time for him. So we just be praying over him as he's ministering to the people out in Africa. So that's a side note. We just got back from a youth conference. Come on. And go ahead and show the first photo, please. Yeah, so that's the youth that came, and it was an awesome time. The teachings were amazing. It was a great time to fellowship together. At this conference, they take dodgeball very seriously. Okay, I just want to throw that out. Like, it's a big deal, okay? And I told the youth before we went, I said, guys, there's 3 things that as a youth group I want us to be known by. Number 1, loving God and growing closer to him, first and foremost. Number 2, loving each other and letting them see that we are his disciples by the way that we're loving each other, loving the other youth groups, and being a light by God's grace. Those 2 things were happening, and it was the unity in our group and others, and just hearing the hearts of the youth and how they were growing close to the Lord this week, these past 3 days was awesome. And then number 3 was to kick some butt in dodgeball, and we did that. I brought this up because I just kind of wanted y'all to see just the intensity. That's all the teams on there. You can go to the next photo, please. Sorry for screaming at you guys. But that's the team that went up there and took the W. We had 3 teams, Team Alpha, Team Retta, and then a fun team. And they all played extremely well. But yeah, so we had a great time. I appreciate the prayers, and I had to kind of share this. I'll probably share this again next week because I have the opportunity to teach, so I'll probably put this up here for a little bit. But it was a fun time, and it was cool to see the youth just growing closer to the Lord and worshiping. Great teaching. Pastor Josh Lawrence, if you guys want to be encouraged, just go listen to some of it. His teachings are just, they are just convicting and encouraging and gospel-centered, and we were blessed by all the teachers, but his teachings for sure in our youth group was encouraging. So, but anyways, that's just wanted to share with you guys, get insight of how this week went. Appreciate the prayers. It was awesome. I'll be praying for Pastor Blake and what God is going to be using him this next few weeks in Africa. And but today we have Jonathan come. You can come on up. He's with Chosen People Ministries, and their heart is really to pray and evangelize and pour into the Jewish community. And he'll share a lot better than I can about the heart behind this ministry. And so if you would just give it up for Jonathan. And I'm going to take this. Don't worry, I'm taking this down.
It's good. Very impressive.
I might leave that now.
No, sure. Congratulations on winning dodgeball. That's awesome. Good morning, everyone. And I just want to thank Pastor Blake for the invitation to speak this morning. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you all. And before getting into this teaching, I just want to give you some background on myself and the ministry work that I do. So I'm a Messianic Jew, and that means I'm a Jewish person who follows Jesus, the Messiah, and I express my faith in Jewish ways while living a Jewish life. Both my parents, they're Jewish, and they're actually the first ones in their families to follow Jesus as the Messiah. And they raised me and my siblings in a Messianic Jewish home where we learned to follow Jesus, who we call by his Hebrew name Yeshua, while observing Jewish commandments and traditions. So I grew up going to a Messianic synagogue where I would celebrate Shabbat on Friday evenings and Saturday mornings. I would go to celebrate the Jewish holidays like Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and so on. I got a lot of days off when I was in school. And when I was 13, I had a bar mitzvah, which is the Jewish coming to age ceremony, where I commit myself as a son of the commandment. And I'm really grateful that both my parents led me to faith in Jesus, in Yeshua, at a very young age, and that I could grow in my faith and Jewish identity in such a strong community. So to kind of skip a little forward, I'll talk about the summer before I started college. And something happened that summer that really affected my life and kind of pushed me into the kind of person that I am today. So that summer, I was at a conference, and I really wanted to receive physical healing from something that I was suffering from for 12 years up to that point, and that is ulcerative colitis. This is an intestinal disease that was plaguing me for so many years and was really affecting me at this conference. So I went up to someone that I trusted to ask them if they would pray for me. I was even teaching at this very conference. And it was really incredible to see where, as this person that was praying for me, he told me that God was healing my intestines, and that he ended his prayer by very loudly and boldly proclaiming, "You are healed." And I was starting to cry tears of joy and just gladness. I was so grateful because finally, what had been inflicting me for so many years, I had received healing from. But then 30 minutes later, I discovered that I wasn't healed. And I walked out very angry, confused, very lost. And I was starting really to doubt my faith, even losing my faith at that point. And then a thought entered into my head that I couldn't deny. I couldn't get it out, and I verbalized it. I said it over and over. Remember, I said Yeshua is Jesus' Hebrew name. And so I said, Yeshua rose from the dead. Yeshua rose from the dead. Yeshua rose from the dead. And I kept on saying that over and over out loud, and it wasn't because I felt God's presence in that very moment, because really I was losing my faith, but I couldn't deny the historical evidence that Jesus, in fact, bodily rose from the dead. So the Holy Spirit was actually used this evidence, this apologetics that I studied. The apologetics is that word that means to make a defense for your faith in Jesus. And I really had studied that previously, and that really pushed me back into faith in Yeshua, restored my faith, and made me a kind of person who really loves to pursue truth. So when I entered college, I went to Kennesaw State University, and when I was in college, I wanted to put myself in situations where my faith would be challenged. So first semester in September of my first year of college, I joined the Atheist Club. And in the club, it was really a great opportunity because I could actually engage in debate and dialogue with people who disagree with me about my faith in Jesus, about my belief in God's existence. It was an awesome time where I was able to make friends and share the gospel with different kinds of people. And I ended up also joining the Apologetics Club, became the student president there, and had great conversations with atheists, agnostic, Mormons, Muslims, all kinds of people of different religious backgrounds and even non-faith backgrounds. But later in college, God instilled a very strong desire in me to reach my own people, my Jewish people, with the gospel. I felt very convicted that while I was bringing the gospel to all these different groups, I was neglecting my own people, my Jewish people. And God showed up in a very powerful way to reveal to me that I need to be bringing this gospel to my own Jewish people. And so I prayed for opportunities for God to use me in that direction. And he answered my prayer very, very quickly. So after finishing my master's degree, I went to Duke and finished my master's degree in New Testament. And after that, I joined staff with Chosen People Ministries. And Chosen People Ministries is a 129-year-old mission to the Jewish people. And this is our mission statement. We exist to pray for, evangelize, disciple, and serve Jewish people and help fellow believers like yourselves do the same. So we're all over the world where there's a major Jewish population. And I joined staff in 2022, where I currently serve in Atlanta, where I work in the digital evangelism department, primarily involved in producing online content related to apologetics, which, as I mentioned, is the defense of our faith in Jesus. And my goal is really to help Jewish people understand the message of Jesus the Messiah and address any misconceptions that they may have that would hinder their acceptance of that message. And I do this by producing that quality online content, which is really desperately needed right now, as many Jewish people, especially religious Jews, they're not going to go to a church. They may not have Christian friends, but they will go to their rabbi with their questions. And one rabbi in particular where this is helpful is Rabbi Google. And in that online space, I can be there as a resource to address their questions and be able to share the gospel with them. When you entered, you may have received a brochure at the table. If you didn't, you can grab one on your way out. But basically here you'll see my bio, you'll see details about Chosen People Ministries, and there's also a tear-off slip there. So if you want to stay connected with me and receive the prayer letter that I send out every month to kind of update those who are praying for me on the ways in which I'm doing ministry to the Jewish people, you could tear that off, fill it out, and give it to me after the service. I'll be there in the back. But what I'm doing here, at the end of my teaching, I'm going to share with you more about the work I'm doing with Chosen People Ministries, and I would love to share with you how you can partner with me in that way to bring the gospel to the Jewish people. My ministry is driven by Romans 1:16, which says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek." This is what Paul says, that the gospel is to the Jew first. And so I just want to pray as we transition now into the teaching. Lord, thank you so much for today. Thank you, Lord, for your love, your grace, and your mercy, and your truth, and your peace, Lord. We just thank you, Lord, for your resurrection. I pray, Lord, that you'll prepare all of our hearts as you have through the worship, and that we'll have a better understanding of you, your resurrection, and reaching the Jewish people who you love with the good news of Yeshua the Messiah. In Yeshua's name, amen. So I'll take you to this picture here, and this is, I was at a Messianic Jewish conference. There's one that happens every single year in Pennsylvania. I was actually just at this conference, but for many decades, there have been what's called Jewish counter-missionaries who show up at the conference. And I didn't say missionary, I said counter-missionary. So what they are a lot of times Orthodox rabbis who go to this conference where there's a lot of Messianic Jews, and they make a tent there in order to wave people in to convince Jewish people like myself to give up their faith in Jesus. They're not part of the conference, they don't attend the conference, but this is what they do. They're trying to persuade Messianic Jews to abandon their faith in Yeshua, in Jesus, to come home to Judaism in their mind. So I was teaching at this conference in 2016, and so I was like, you know what? I want to go test my arguments down there with these counter-missionaries. I'm going to be presenting to the youth at this conference, to the 13 to 30-year-olds, and I want to present to them what I'm going to present to everyone else because I really value truth. And so I went down to the tent, and there was one rabbi there, and he said to me, "We can talk about anything you want to talk about. You pick the topic." So I said, "Perfect, let's talk about the resurrection of Jesus." And he said, "Yes, we could talk about the resurrection, but I just want to tell you," this is what he said, "I just want to tell you," he said that even if you could convince me that Jesus rose from the dead, even if Jesus appeared right now and he was standing right in front of me, this rabbi said, I still would not believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And so that really, I was really wondering why that's the case, because the resurrection is what restored my faith in Jesus. It's the reason I believe he's the Messiah. It's the reason I give my life to following him. So the rabbi told me, he said that in the Torah, in Deuteronomy, there is a text that says that even false prophets can perform miracles. And it also says the reason false prophets do this is because God is testing Israel. So for this rabbi, the resurrection, in his mind, if it happened, because in his mind it didn't, but he said if it happened, it would just be an example of God testing Israel to see whether Israel, the Jewish people, would be faithful to God rather than following and worshiping a false Messiah. That's what he said to me, and I had no idea what to say. I was stumped. I talked about the evidence for the resurrection, but I didn't want to go to its theological implications because I wasn't familiar with this text he was referring to. In college, a year later, I was hosting a debate between two people, one Dr. Michael Brown and the other Rabbi Daniel Freitag, a local Orthodox rabbi in the Atlanta area. And the topic was, is Jesus the Messiah? And Dr. Brown, a Messianic Jew, he built a very strong case that Jesus is the Messiah using Messianic prophecy as his foundation. And Rabbi Freitag, this is the way he responded. He says how the Torah teaches that Jewish people are not supposed to listen to anyone who tells the Jewish people they no longer have a responsibility to keep the commandments that God gave Israel. And so in his mind, the gospel removes that responsibility from Jewish people. In his words, he put it like this. He said, all I need, he's holding up his Bible, his Old Testament or Tanakh. He said, all I need is for there to be one place in this book, one just once anywhere, first-person statement to me from God that says, Dear Jew, I changed my mind. No longer shall you keep the commandments, for the Messiah will come, and through his death, you will no longer need to keep the commandments. I bring up this quote to help you kind of get into where Jewish people, religious Jewish people, are coming from when they are presented with the gospel. This is really a very common response to it. And I want to help you understand where this rabbi is coming from. He understands that the Torah teaches that Israel, the Jewish people, are expected to keep God's commandments, not as a way of earning their salvation, but as a way of responding to God's love and his gift of giving the Torah in that relationship. So Rabbi Freitag, his understanding of the gospel is that it teaches that if he follows Jesus as the Messiah, then he's no longer going to be Jewish because he'll no longer have that expectation to keep the commandments. It's kind of like saying he has a father and the father gave the gift of the Torah, but he's hearing that the father took away that gift from him. And so he rejects it. And one of the texts he pointed to in that debate is Deuteronomy 13. Where he says, where we read here, this is the text that the other rabbi brought up to me when it comes to the resurrection. And I'll read you the text here. The text says, if a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder comes true of which he spoke to you, saying, let's follow other gods whom you have not known, and let's serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to find out whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall follow the Lord your God and fear him, and you shall keep his commandments, listen to his voice, serve him, and cling to him. But that prophet or that dreamer of dreams shall be put to death, because he has spoken falsely against the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery, to drive you from the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk, so you shall eliminate the evil from among you. So as I mentioned, I didn't know what to say to this rabbi when he brought this objection, and this is also brought up by Rabbi Freitag, and it's a very common Jewish response to the resurrection. But after the years I spent studying this and really digging into this, because I really love and pursue truth, I've been able to find an answer. And this morning, I want to share with you that answer that I have given to counter-missionaries, to Jewish people, when it comes to why the resurrection actually does demonstrate that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. And this text in the Torah in Deuteronomy 13 even helps us understand that even more fully. So to do that, I want to ask questions. I want to ask questions of the text as we're studying the Bible here. And the first question I want to ask is, why would a false prophet use a miraculous sign to lead Israel astray? Like, why would a false prophet do this in their attempt to kind of pull Israel away from following God? So we need to look at what the Torah says for how we can identify whether someone is a prophet. And let's go there. Let's go to Exodus. In Exodus 4, in Exodus 3 is where God appears to Moses through the burning bush, and he really calls him to be the one to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. And in Exodus 4, Moses really responds to God, asking him, kind of challenging him of why he's choosing him as this prophet, as this one who's going to do this. And God responds by providing Moses with 3 miraculous signs that were intended to prove that he is a prophet before Israel. So I'll read it here. Then Moses said, what if they do not believe me or listen to what I say? For they may say, the Lord has not appeared to you. The Lord said to him, what is that in your hand? And he said, a staff. Then he said, throw it on the ground. So he threw it on the ground, and it turned into a serpent. And Moses fled from it. But the Lord said to Moses, reach out your hand and grasp it by its tail. So he reached out with his hand and caught it, and it turned into a staff in his hand. And here's the key. So that they may believe the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has appeared to you. So these signs were intended to validate Moses as a prophet before Israel, to convince the Jewish people enslaved in Egypt that Moses was truly sent by God. In Exodus 4:28 through 31, Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord which he had sent him, and all the signs which he had commanded him to do. Then Moses and Aaron went and assembled all the elders of the sons of Israel, and Aaron spoke all the words which the Lord had spoken to Moses. He performed the signs in the sight of the people, so the people believed. The reason the elders of Israel are convinced that Moses is a true prophet is because they witnessed how God validated him through these miraculous signs. And you see this throughout the story of Passover, the story of the Exodus with the 10 plagues, where God continues to validate Moses as a true prophet. We get to the Red Sea, and we see that Pharaoh finally lets the Israelites go. And as they approach the Red Sea, there's that barrier. How are they going to get across? Moses raises his rod. The Red Sea splits. It's that epic account we see in the Bible. And the children of Israel go through it on dry ground. And then the Egyptian army comes from behind. And so Moses raises his rod, and the sea comes crashing on the Egyptian army. And we read the people's response in Exodus 14:31. When Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. They believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. The reason the people of Israel have faith that Moses is a true prophet is because they witnessed how God validated him through these miraculous signs, and especially the parting of the Red Sea and the crashing of the sea on the Egyptian army. We see this throughout the Old Testament, throughout what Jewish people call the Tanakh, as I mentioned that word there. We see this in 1 Kings 18 with the showdown between Elijah and the prophets of Baal, where we see in that account where the prophets of Baal and Elijah have this kind of test to see whose God is the true God, whose prophets or prophet is the true prophet. And the answer is, well, whosever God answers by fire, brings fire down on the offering from heaven, that's the true God, and Israel should be serving that God. And of course, we read how fire did not fall on the offering of the prophets of Baal, those false prophets. But when it's Elijah's turn, he says, "Let it be known that you, God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word." He's providing the reason for the fire to come down. He's asking God to bring it down. And when he does this, he says, "Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that this people may know that you, Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back." And then fire falls down from heaven. It consumes the offering, the wood, the stones. It licks up the water that's surrounding in the ditch. And the people fall on their faces, and they declare, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." And consistent with Deuteronomy 13, Elijah provides a sign to justify his status as a true prophet to bring Israel back to the worship of the true God. So here's the point. There are many examples in the Old Testament, in the Tanakh, where God validates his true prophets through miraculous signs. And this helps us understand why the false prophet does this as well, why the false prophet uses miracles to lead Israel astray. They're mimicking the real thing in their attempt to lead Israel to follow a false God, to lead Israel away from their God. So if this is the case, then how can the Jewish people distinguish between a true prophet and a false prophet if they both produce miracles? Like, how are they able to do this? Let's go back to the text. Deuteronomy 13, and I highlighted in yellow what is really helpful here in finding out the answer to this question. So we read here, the false prophet says, "Let's follow other gods whom you have not known, and let's serve them." And then we read, "You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or dreamer of dreams." We read that for the Lord your God is testing you. For the Lord your God is testing you to find out whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. You shall follow the Lord your God and fear him, and you shall keep his commandments. This false prophet is trying to drive you away from the way in which the Lord your God commanded you to walk. We see here that it comes down to the teaching of the one claiming to be a prophet. If their teaching does not line up with what God has already revealed to Israel, then Israel, even if they see a miracle, they're not supposed to follow. And we see there that it says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul." As I mentioned earlier, Jewish people, God gave Israel a specific way to live. And the way in which he calls Israel to live is a way in which they can express their love towards him. It's this act of love and obedience that God calls the Israelites to live out their lives. And so this false prophet is trying to lead them away from that way of life, lead their love away from the God of Israel. So it comes down to the teaching of the one claiming to be a prophet. But how do false prophets perform signs and wonders? Like, how are they able to do this? Let's go to what we find in the New Testament. This is really helpful here. In Matthew chapter 12, this actually provides a lot of insight. And so here, this is an example of where there's a demon-possessed man who's blind and mute, and he's brought to Yeshua. He's brought to Jesus. And Yeshua, Jesus, he heals this man from this illness. He casts out the demon. And we read right here, he healed him so that the man who was unable to speak talked and could see. And all the crowds were amazed and were saying, "This man cannot be the son of David, can he?" But when the Pharisees heard this, they said, "This man casts out demons only by Beelzebul, the ruler of demons." So there's a group of Pharisees here, not all Pharisees, but there's a certain group of Pharisees who recognize that Jesus is performing miracles. And they also see that this Jewish crowd is considering that Jesus might be the Messiah, the son of David, that Davidic king that's foretold in the Hebrew Scriptures, in the Old Testament. And so what they do is they don't deny that Jesus did miracles. What they do is they say the power for his miracles is not coming from God, it's coming from demons. It's coming from Beelzebul. That's helpful. Not all miracles are the same. Some come from God, some come from demonic power. There's a great Jewish scholar today. He's not alive today, but he's in the 12th century Jewish scholar, very influential within Judaism. And I was looking at his commentary on Deuteronomy 13 in order to kind of understand the text and see where Jewish people are coming from in their interpretation on this. And so he makes some really insightful remarks that I want to share with you here as we approach this question of how can false prophets perform miracles. He says, "We are enjoined to yield obedience to one who asserts that he is a prophet, provided he could substantiate his claims by miracle or proofs. Although there is a possibility that he is an impostor, however, if the would-be prophet teaches tenets that negate the doctrines of Moses, then we must repudiate him." He's recognizing that obedience to the one claimed to be a prophet comes through recognizing if they do a miracle. But if they teach against the Torah, if they teach against what Moses has revealed, then it doesn't matter about the miracle, they're a false prophet. What Maimonides goes on to say, he says, since he, speaking of the false prophet, seeks to discredit the teaching of Moses, we know for certain that he is a false prophet, and whatever he did was done by secret arts and with the aid of witchcraft. So here's kind of a way to kind of map out what I'm presenting here. And that is, someone comes to Israel, they claim to be a prophet. They produce a miraculous sign. Then Israel is supposed to evaluate their teaching. If they deny the Torah, that teaching indicates that their sign, their miracle, was empowered by something or someone other than God. If they come to Israel, they claim to be a prophet, they produce a miraculous sign, they affirm the Torah, they affirm what God has revealed to Israel, that teaching indicates that their sign was empowered by God. It comes down to the teaching of the one claiming to be a prophet, and if their sign, their miracle, was in fact empowered by God. And we see an example of miracles empowered by someone other than God right there in the Old Testament, right there in the Torah. Exodus 7:22. But the soothsayer priests of Egypt did the same with their secret arts, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he did not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. This is when the Egyptian magicians were mimicking Moses' miracles, and the text there says it directly that they were doing this through secret arts. In Jewish writings, they even associate this or attribute this to demonic power. Another question to ask here is, okay, so this rabbi, remember what I told you? This rabbi told me that the resurrection would just be an example of God testing Israel. So would God validate a false prophet? Like, would God deceive Israel by resurrecting Yeshua, validating Yeshua, Jesus, as a false prophet? Like, would God do that? And I say the answer is no. It's a very hard no. And let's look at a text that helps me come to that conclusion. Helps us come to that conclusion. That is Deuteronomy chapter 18. There's two texts in Deuteronomy that speak of a false prophet and how to identify them, Deuteronomy 13 and Deuteronomy 18. And here we see a direct answer to the question of recognizing a false prophet. It says, "And if you say in your heart, how will we recognize the word which the Lord has not spoken? When the prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, and the thing does not happen or come true, that is a thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You are not to be afraid of him." So here we learn that God would not fulfill the prophecy of a false prophet. And we can therefore reason that God would not validate a false prophet by empowering their miracle. I'll say it again. God would not fulfill the prophecy of a false prophet and therefore would not validate a false prophet by empowering their miracle. It's the idea here, then how is God testing Israel? Well, God is testing Israel by allowing the false prophet to live and to perform miracles through any means necessary, not through his power, but through any power he chooses, which very well is the case, being demonic power. One Jewish scholar puts it this way, the Lord is testing you by allowing the sign to come true. And that's not the same thing as empowering. Allowing versus empowering. God would not empower a false prophet to perform miracles. So here's the key points that I want to drive here today. Signs that derive from God's power validate true prophets. God would not validate a false prophet. And God tests Israel by allowing false prophets to perform miraculous signs. So let's go back to the text in Matthew chapter 12. After Jesus provides an answer to this objection that he's using demonic power to lead Israel astray, some of the Pharisees there are still convinced he's a false prophet. And they ask him for a sign to prove he's the Messiah. And we read here what happens in Matthew 12, verse 39 through 40. Yeshua says, an evil and adulterous generation craves a sign, and so no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was in the stomach of the sea monster for 3 days and 3 nights, so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. What Jesus is saying here is that the sign that will prove that he is the Messiah will be comparable to Jonah's experience in the belly of the great fish. He's going to die, and shortly thereafter, he's going to rise from the dead. But of all the miraculous signs that Jesus could have chosen to demonstrate that he's the Messiah, why did he choose the resurrection in particular? Like, why resurrection? Well, I think the answer becomes very clear when we understand that resurrection is something that only God has the power to do. We see this in the Torah, in Deuteronomy 32:39. So see now that I am he, there is no God besides me, it is I who put to death and give life. Or 1 Samuel 2:1-6, indeed there is no one besides you, nor is there any rock like our God. The Lord puts to death and makes alive, he brings down to Sheol and brings up. In Ezekiel, there's this great passage in Ezekiel talking about the valley of the dry bones, that where God reveals this vision to Ezekiel, speaking of the restoration of Israel back to their ancestral homeland. And he says right here in the text, and he said to me, God speaking to Ezekiel, Son of man, can these bones live? Ezekiel answers, Lord God, you yourself know, because only God can raise the dead. We read on, therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the Lord God says, behold, I'm going to open your graves and cause you to come up out of your graves, my people, and I will bring you into the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am the Lord when I have opened your graves and caused you to come up out of your graves. Israel will recognize God's unique identity when they witness his power to resurrect the dead, because resurrection is something only God has the power to do. I won't read through these texts, but this is not a controversial point for religious Jews. There is Jewish literature that's written, of course, after the New Testament called the Jerusalem Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, both of which affirm this reality that only God has the power to resurrect the dead. But I will share this one prayer with you that speaks of this power. So religious Jews will pray 3 times a day. Very observant Jews will pray 3 times a day. And these are set kind of liturgical prayers that they will pray. One of these prayers is called the Amidah. And there's a certain section of this prayer that praises God for his unique power to resurrect the dead. So I'll read that prayer for you in English. You are mighty forever, O Lord. You revive the dead. Who is like you, master of mighty deeds? Who can be compared to you, O King, who causes death and restores life and causes your salvation to sprout? You are faithful to restore the dead to life. Blessed are you, O Lord, who brings life to the dead. Like a beating drum, this prayer really praises God for his unique power to resurrect the dead. So we can kind of put this into a sort of argument here, kind of a way of demonstrating Jesus as the Messiah, and really presenting that way of thinking to Jewish people who don't believe, but also to those who do, as a way of solidifying faith in Yeshua, and also for all of yourselves, even if you're not Jewish. you can see that Yeshua is the Messiah through his resurrection. Where we see here that one, Jesus claimed his messianic identity would be validated through the sign of his resurrection. Signs that derive from God's power validate true prophets. God would not validate a false prophet. Jesus rose from the dead. Only God raises the dead. Therefore, Jesus is the Messiah. The resurrection is the indication, is God's validation that Jesus is the Messiah. And this is not a really new argument. This is really an ancient argument that I'm really trying to revive here. Because in Acts chapter 2, we see that Peter is standing in Jerusalem, in the temple, on Shavuot, or also known as Pentecost, where Jewish people from around the world are coming to pilgrimage to Jerusalem to celebrate this festival of God giving Israel the Torah. And Peter takes this opportunity to say this: "Men of Israel, listen to these words. Jesus the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs which God performed through him in your midst, just as you yourselves know." Notice there how God's power is behind Jesus' miracles. As I mentioned, that's very significant. This man delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. He's saying that you thought he was a false prophet. You had him put to death. But that wasn't right, because it says, "It is this Jesus whom God raised up, a fact to which we are all witnesses." The disciples, Peter and the disciples, are witnesses to the risen Jesus. He says, "Therefore, let all the house of Israel know assuredly that God has made him both Lord and Messiah, this Jesus whom you crucified." God has indicated to Israel that Jesus is Lord and Messiah by raising him from the dead. So here's the objection again, to kind of go back to the beginning from what the rabbi told me. Basically, he was saying Jesus cannot be the Messiah because he is a false prophet according to Deuteronomy 13. A quick response to this, once you understand the whole context of Deuteronomy 13 and the significance of Jesus' resurrection, is that Deuteronomy 13 helps us see that Jesus' resurrection is God's validation that Jesus is the Messiah who taught Jewish people to live in obedience to the commandments. And the reason I bring that up, that last line up there, is because for a lot of Jewish people, they think that by accepting Jesus as the Messiah, that means they need to give up their Jewish identity. That means they need to give up following the commandments that God gave Israel, making them unique and distinct. But what we see here in Deuteronomy 13 is that God is not going to raise a false prophet from the dead. He's not going to validate a false prophet. But by raising Jesus from the dead, this actually helps us understand Jesus' teachings when it comes to what he calls, how God calls Israel to live. Mark chapter 12, if you want to root it in Scripture, look at what Mark chapter 12 says here. One of the scribes came up and heard them arguing, and recognizing that he had answered them well, asked him, "What commandment is the foremost of all?" Jesus answered, "The foremost is, Hear Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." Jesus has not failed the Deuteronomy 13 test. Instead, he upholds the Torah, recites this Jewish prayer called the Shema, the Hear Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. It's Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Jesus affirms the Shema. He affirms that God alone should be worshiped. And in line with other Jewish thinkers, he cites Leviticus 19:18, affirming that love is the substance of the Torah. The resurrection is the indication that Jesus is the Messiah and the revelation of his teaching for the Jewish people. A lot of Jewish people don't believe that Jesus, a lot of Jewish people who don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah will not believe that he's risen from the dead. And so as a way of kind of a tool to kind of share with you is I really recommend this book by Dr. Pinchas Lapid. It's called The Resurrection of Jesus, A Jewish Perspective. And it's actually written by an Orthodox Jewish rabbi and New Testament scholar who took a look at the historical evidence for Jesus' resurrection and came to this conclusion. He says, "I accept the resurrection of Jesus not as an invention of the community of disciples, but as a historical event." And I think that's very powerful to be able to look at that evidence for yourself and also see how even an Orthodox Jewish scholar could come to that conclusion that Jesus did in fact rise from the dead. The resurrection is very central to the gospel message. As we read, if you want to find a verse that really encapsulates the gospel. It gives a really succinct summary. Go to 2 Timothy 2:8, where Paul says, "Remember Jesus, Messiah, risen from the dead, descendant of David, according to my gospel." Or other translations say, "This is my gospel." The resurrection there is central, and so is the name Jesus, or in Hebrew, Yeshua. Yeshua's name, Jesus' name, concerns the salvation of the Jewish people. That good news prophesied there, that good news spoken of there, comes straight out of Isaiah, where we read Isaiah saying, "How delightful on the mountains are the feet of the one who brings good news, who announces peace and brings good news of happiness, who announces salvation." Actually, the Hebrew word there is Yeshua. And says to Zion, "Your God reigns. Listen, your watchmen raise their voices. They shout joyfully together, for they will see with their own eyes when the Lord restores Zion. Be cheerful, shout joyfully together, you ruins of Jerusalem. For the Lord has comforted his people, and he has redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord has bared his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, so that all the ends of the earth may see the salvation of our God." It's right there. The gospel is right there in Isaiah. And I'm getting closer to closing if the worship leader wants to come up to as well. So the gospel, what I want to say before I end is that I really want this to motivate you to say that Yeshua is the Messiah. Many Jewish people don't know that. They have certain objections that really are barriers that keep them from accepting that message as true. And I just want to be able to share with you that, no, Yeshua, his understanding him as the Messiah really can be rooted in the Torah, the very text that many Jewish people think kind of turn them away from following him as the Messiah. And so there's really scriptural basis for bringing this good news to Jewish people. Romans 1:16, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek." Romans 10:1, "Brothers and sisters, my heart's desire and my prayer to God is for them, Israel, for their salvation." Romans 11:1 and 2, "I say then, God has not rejected his people, has he? Far from it, for I too am an Israelite, a descendant of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. God has not rejected his people whom he foreknew." And in Romans 11:26, we read where Paul says, "All Israel will be saved." Before I end, I want to let you know the ways in which you can stay connected with me and even in supporting my ministry. Working in Chosen People Ministries apologetics department, it's my goal to be a resource for Jewish people who are seeking answers to their questions about Jesus and the New Testament. It's a form of outreach adapted today to meet Jewish people where they're at in a unique way online. I don't want my Jewish people to dismiss Jesus for the wrong reasons. I want them to see the Jewish Messiah and come to know Jesus as the Messiah. I want them to see that truth that has been so impactful in my own life in following him as a Jewish person. So I'm part of a team that produces this quality online content addressing unique Jewish objections and questions, showing Jewish people that the teachings in the New Testament are both Jewish and true, and that they can and should remain Jewish if they say yes to following Jesus as the Messiah. So if you would like to stay connected with me in my ministry, I send out a monthly prayer letter, and you can tear off the slip. If you haven't received one, there's more in the back. If you tear off the slip, fill it out, you can receive a book out there. It's by Dr. Mitch Glazer, the president of Chosen People Ministries. It's my gift to you if you just fill it out so you can be praying for me as I'm doing this ministry. And also, if anyone feels led by the Lord to support the work that I do, even on a monthly basis, that really means a lot and enables me to do the work that I do for God's kingdom. I just want to thank you all for listening, being attentive to me sharing this message about the Jewish Messiah, how his resurrection points to him being the Messiah, and what that means for Jewish people and also even for our own faith. And I just want to pray that God uses you to bring the gospel to the Jewish people who so desperately need it. So I just pray blessings upon all of you.